So the military exercises were really quite interesting. They were super realistic this year. In the past, quite a few of these Taiwanese exercises have been somewhat ceremonial, but this year, the exercises went on double the length of time from last year. They lasted for about 10 days. There were about 20,000 to 22,000 Taiwanese troops taking part. And the nature of the exercises were supposed to mirror or to echo the chaos of war. The exercise was being undertaken by Taiwanese troops with a decentralized command, and they were simulating urban warfare, bridge and intersection defense, as well as a communication blackout drill in major cities such as Taipei. And the other thing that was being simulated was how Taiwan would respond to a blockade of the island by China. So you can see, I think, through the details of what took place in this military exercise.
大家好，这里是嘎人四绝频道。刚才的精彩集锦已经让我们看到，这次台湾军演不再只是走过场，而是明显朝着实战化方向推进。演练持续约10天，参与官兵超过2万人，甚至模拟了城市作战、桥梁和交通要道防守，以及台北等大城市通讯中断后的应对。更值得注意的是，演习还把中国大陆可能采取的封锁行动纳入推演，指挥权下放、战场混乱和基础设施受损都成为训练的一部分。这样的变化究竟说明台海局势正在走向怎样的温度？台湾不断增加的国防预算又能否真正转化为战备能力？本期节目还将继续追踪中国房地产巨头许家印落幕后的深层影响，并揭开人形机器人的另一面。买下这些机器人的为什么不是普通家庭，而是政府支持的训练中心？所谓人工智能热潮背后，究竟是技术突破，还是又一场资本泡沫？接下来，我们一起看清这些看似分散却彼此相连的变化。
Defense spending for next year. To me, what it means is that Taiwan's threat perception towards the mainland, towards China, is rising. And I think we can also see that in the recent military exercises that Taiwan conducted. The reason why, of course, and I'm sure all of our listeners are well aware of this, the reason why this is such a hot topic is because we have a three-way dynamic here. You have mainland China on one side, and then on the other side, you have Taiwan and the United States. And of course, in 1979, the United States signed the Taiwan Relations Act. Now, this does not legally commit the US to use military force to defend Taiwan, but what it does do is it requires the US to provide Taiwan with the tools and arms needed for self-defense and to maintain US military capacity to resist threats against Taiwan's security. So it's a somewhat vague form of words, but if you ask me, what it means is that it doesn't mean that Uncle Sam will be fighting alongside Taiwanese soldiers against China necessarily. Of course, the US could choose to do that, but it isn't required to do that by this act. But what it does mean is that the US is very much involved in the arms that Taiwan needs to defend itself against a potential threat from China. And so that's the key background. And that's why I think both this new budget that Taiwan is proposing and the military exercise that took place earlier on this month are key, because to me, they both mean that the threat perception from Taiwan to China is rising. So the military exercises were really quite interesting. They were super realistic this year. In the past, quite a few of these Taiwanese exercises have been somewhat ceremonial, but this year, the exercises went on double the length of time from last year. They lasted for about 10 days. There were about 20,000 to 22,000 Taiwanese troops taking part. And the nature of the exercises were supposed to mirror or to echo the chaos of war. The exercise was being undertaken by Taiwanese troops with a decentralized command, and they were simulating urban warfare, bridge and intersection defense, as well as a communication blackout drill in major cities such as Taipei. And the other thing that was being simulated was how Taiwan would respond to a blockade of the island by China. So you can see, I think, through the details of what took place in this military exercise, that Taiwan is getting very serious about preparing for an invasion. Now, I want to be absolutely clear. This does not mean that there will be an invasion, nor does it mean that I am predicting an invasion. I'm absolutely not predicting an invasion, but it shows that Taiwan is getting, I would say, much more serious. And to my mind, that's where this budget, the increase of 18%, taking this budget to above 1 trillion Taiwanese dollars, that's 31 billion US dollars for the first time. I think it just shows that Taiwan's getting more serious. Now, if you ask me, this is a natural response to the increased bellicosity or pressure that Taiwan is experiencing from China. The People's Liberation Army, that's China's huge army, routinely sends warplanes across the median line of the Taiwan Strait. The Taiwan Strait is the rather large waterway, actually.
And the reason I say that is because I think that the policy on conscription has been a pretty strong signal that they are more worried of the threat of a showdown over Taiwan with the mainland. So before 2008, there was a 2-year mandatory military service. This is true of a lot of neighboring countries, whether it's, there's a strong tradition of military service in a lot of neighboring countries in the region. If you look at South Korea and also Singapore. But then in 2013, they phased that out and replaced it with a 4-month conscription that was largely, for voluntary work. And then just 2 years ago, so 2024, they brought back 1-year military service as part of the conscription program. Again, suggesting that the government, the Taiwanese government, is getting more worried about the domestic combat readiness of the Taiwanese population. But I may differ from your assessment, James, so correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think it's so much the threat that they're perceiving from China as it is the threat of America withdrawing. Because you rightly do, point out the fact that embedded in the Taiwan Relations Act, going back to 1979, is this degree of strategic ambiguity that the U.S., I think, deliberately put in terms of the language, such that it is not clear what American involvement or deterrence would look like if China did a blockade, a quarantine, or a full-scale invasion. And so within that gray zone, so to speak, the U.S. has been, I think, largely happy to support Taiwan through arms sales. Like I said just now, we haven't seen the $14 billion, which would have been a record package, go through this year. I doubt it will go through, and certainly not before Xi meets with Trump in the U.S. September 24. So then that builds a case for the Taiwanese to say, hey, if Trump and the U.S. and writ large are not going to back us and they're not going to supply us with arms, then we've got to look to our own population and to our own industrial complex for combat readiness and capabilities. And again, and this leads me to my next question. I'm curious if you have a thought on this. Have there been lessons from Ukraine for Taiwan? Because I think there are some parallels, in terms of Russia and China being significantly larger than Ukraine and Taiwan, respectively. Russia and China are nuclear powers. Ukraine and Taiwan are not. And similarly, Ukraine and I think Taiwan will have to fight to some extent asymmetric warfare given the capabilities disparity. And here, just in recent years, it looks like the Taiwanese have shifted away from some of the traditional military equipment that they're getting from the US to developing their own indigenous anti-ship missiles, UAV, drones. Again, I think that's been a big lesson from Ukraine, that actually drones can have a real asymmetric impact on the battlefield, and also laying down sea mines as well to disrupt PLA submarines and carrier vessels. I want to get your sense of that trend, because based on conversations over the years, really, I think the direction of travel from people that I've spoken to in Taiwan is that, hey, the Americans are not reliable allies. We need to look to ourselves.
Yeah, I must say I have also heard that. I've been to Taiwan a couple of times over the last couple of years, and I used to be based there, and I've met Taiwanese people coming over here as well, and that sense is definitely on the rise, I would say. The level of US commitment towards stepping in with military force in the event of a conflict between China and Taiwan, I would say the level of Taiwanese confidence that would happen is declining, dwindling, perhaps even dwindling sharply. But the truth is that we just don't know. This is a decision that will be taken by the US president and the people around him at the time of whatever conflagration occurs. And there are so many scenarios for what type of conflagration might occur between China and Taiwan. There's the full-on invasion scenario, but increasingly these days what we hear is gray zone tactics, a kind of a blockade or a partial blockade or a drone swarm over Taiwan, or knocking out critical Taiwanese infrastructure and issuing ultimatums. There are so many permutations as to how China could decide to pressure Taiwan that it's very hard to give a clear answer on how the US might back Taiwan in that instance. So, it is just a very subtle and complicated and also evolving picture, I would say.
Okay, we'll be back with more after a quick.
回看这一期节目，表面上我们谈的是3个彼此分散的话题，台海局势不断升温，泛大从中国首富神话走向无期徒刑，以及人形机器人在中国掀起的新一轮热潮。但把这3条线索放在一起，就会发现它们其实共同指向一个更深层的问题。当一个社会进入高度不确定的阶段，真正决定未来的往往不只是账面上的数字、宏大的口号，或者一时之间受到追捧的明星企业，而是一个国家能不能把资源、制度、技术和社会信心转化为长期而可靠的实际能力。先看台海问题，台湾提出创纪录的国防预算，恢复1年义务役，并通过更加贴近实战的军事演习，模拟城市战、交通要道防守、通信中断以及海上封锁等情境。这些变化至少说明一点，台湾对于安全环境的判断正在变得更加严肃。预算增加并不等于战斗力会按照同样比例提升，军队人数增加也不代表动员体系就已经成熟，真正重要的是武器能不能及时到位，后勤能不能持续运转，指挥系统能不能在通信受阻时保持有效，普通民众能不能理解危机、承受压力，并在关键时刻形成足够的社会韧性。乌克兰的经验也提醒我们，战争从来不是单纯的装备竞赛，非对称作战、无人机、布雷、分散式指挥、预备役动员以及全民对于战争风险的心理准备，都可能改变力量悬殊下的结果。可是任何经验都不能简单复制。台湾与乌克兰的地理环境、人口结构、盟友关系、经济条件和潜在冲突形态都不相同，尤其在台海问题上，所谓战略模糊，让各方都必须面对一个无法提前确认的答案。如果发生的是全面入侵，美国会如何行动？如果发生的是局部封锁、基础设施攻击或者持续升级的灰色地带行动，美国又会采取什么程度的介入？正因为答案不确定，台湾才越来越重视自身的防卫能力。对于普通人来说，这也意味着判断局势时，不能只看某一笔军售是否通过，更要观察训练、储备、工业能力和社会动员是否真正形成体系。再看挖大事件，徐家印曾经是中国最富有、最受关注的企业家之一。清大也曾经从房地产开发商扩张到金融、汽车、足球、娱乐和慈善等多个领域。可是当企业依靠不断加杠杆、虚增收入和复杂的资金循环来维持增长时，规模越大，风险就越容易被掩盖，最终形成一座看似宏伟实则脆弱的纸牌屋。巨大留下的不只是一个企业家的个人败局，也不只是投资者账面上的损失，更包括购房者、供应商、地方政府、金融机构以及整个房地产产业链所承担的长期代价。这起案件最值得警惕的地方是它曾经长期得到市场、媒体、地方权力和专业机构的共同认可。企业越有名， 融资越容易，融资越容易，扩张越快，扩张越快，越能制造出继续融资的假象。当审计、监管和地方利益没有及时形成有效制衡时，所有人都可能在繁荣时期选择相信好消息，却忽略那些不合常理的警报。今天资金从房地产转向科技股、电动车、电池、人工智能和机器人，并不意味着新的领域天然更加安全。产业有前景，不代表每一家企业都有前景；技术有价值，也不代表任何估值都合理。投资者真正需要关注的始终是现金流、真实订单、研发能力、治理结构和企业能否在补贴减少、竞争加剧之后继续活下去。人形机器人则展示了中国制造业的另一面。一方面，中国拥有完整的供应链、庞大的工程师队伍和大量政府支持的训练中心，因此在生产、测试和数据积累方面速度很快。另一方面，目前许多机器人并不是普通家庭真正购买的消费品，而是进入大学研究机构和训练中心，通过真人远程操控完成任务，再把操作数据用于改进人工智能模型。换句话说，今天的市场可能还处在训练技术、收集数据和验证商业模式的阶段，距离机器人能够在真实环境中听懂临时指令、适应复杂变化并稳定完成大部分任务，仍然存在很长的路。这也解释了为什么机器人产业既令人期待又容易出现泡沫。人形机器人确实可能拥有巨大的应用空间，从工厂、仓储、养老到危险环境作业都有现实需求。但未来市场足够大，并不意味着当前数百家创业公司都能成功。地方政府竞相扶持本地龙头，可能推动产业快速成长，也可能造成重复投资、产能过剩和企业扎堆上市。放大光伏、电动车等产业留下的共同教训是，政策推动可以加速起跑，却不能代替真实需求，更不能永久掩盖低效率和高负债。同时，人形机器人还会带来比普通商品更加复杂的安全问题。它们拥有摄像头、麦克风、传感器和联网能力，能够进入家庭、工厂甚至公共空间。未来各国真正争论的恐怕不只是价格和性能，还包括数据归属、远程控制、软件后门、网络攻击以及国家安全。中国企业能不能打开海外市场，最终不仅取决于机器人跑得多快、动作多灵活，也取决于其他国家是否信任他们的系统、标准和数据处理方式。技术竞争到了这个阶段，工程能力固然重要，透明度、责任边界和安全规则同样不可缺少。因此，本期内容带给我们的核心启示可以概括成一句话：不要被表面的速度和规模牵着走。国防预算增长需要落实为真实的防卫能力，企业市值上涨需要经得起财务和现金流的检验，机器人数量增加需要最终转化为可靠、可负担、被社会接受的产品。无论是观察台海风险，还是判断中国经济与科技产业的未来，我们都应该把注意力从最热闹的新闻转向那些更慢、更基础，却真正决定结果的问题。制度能否纠错，市场能否出清，社会能否承受代价，技术能否服务于真实世界。国际局势不会按照任何人的剧本简单发展，出口、关税、军售、产业政策和科技管制之间也会不断相互影响。我们能做的是保持事实意识，区分已经发生的变化与尚未证实的预测，既不低估风险，也不被恐慌和狂热左右。对于台海，我们需要关注和平与沟通是否仍有空间；对于泛大，我们需要记住繁荣背后的债务和监督；对于机器人，我们既要看到技术进步的可能，也要警惕资本热潮重复过去的路径。本期内容就为大家总结到这里。你认为台湾增加国防投入最需要优先补足的是装备、训练还是社会动员？N 大事件之后，中国的新科技产业会不会出现类似的过度投资？人形机器人距离真正进入普通人的生活还有多久？欢迎把你的看法写在评论区，也欢迎转发这期节目，让更多人一起讨论正在改变亚洲与世界的力量。感谢收看，记得点赞订阅，持续关注更多精彩视频。